It's a huge platform for three former Cougars at the Senior Bowl this week. Let's get you ready for that. And also, let's talk BYU basketball in the future for Mark Pope's squad as they get ready for the Big 12.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Always appreciate you guys checking out the show. Very proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, the motto is your team every day, and as such, this is your only daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Our title sponsor today is our friends over at FanDuel. This episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. The Senior Bowl is ongoing in Mobile, Alabama. We have people from the Locked On Podcast Network down there covering the event that will be joining us here later in the week, hopefully providing us with some content, some audio, video maybe that we possibly could use from the three BYU Cougars that are in attendance at this showcase event down there. It is the preeminent post-season showcase for NFL draft hopefuls. Jeff Hansen tweeted this out. I've seen it reported elsewhere that somewhere between 80 and 85% of all Senior Bowl invitees are drafted in the NFL draft. Essentially, if you're a Senior Bowl guy, most NFL teams have what they call a draftable grade on you, whether that's a first, second, third, all the way through the seventh round. They have a draftable grade. They think you are a draftable prospect. Does that mean all of them have that draftable grade? No, but enough of them do, and you're big enough name, I guess, also at the same time, for the Senior Bowl to bring you in. So obviously, Jaren Hall, Puka, Nacua, and Blake Freeland are there in Alabama trying to show what they're capable of doing. And I think the biggest thing for all three of them is just showing that, hey, we may not have played a Power 5 schedule during our time playing for the BYU Cougars. We played as close to one as we possibly could have, and we were all productive at that level. That's the positive for these BYU guys. What I love about this is a huge platform for all three of them to show what they can do. I want to start off with Jaren Hall. And obviously, Jaren is a guy that is getting all kinds of hype. He is actually a guy that a lot of the national scouts out there, I saw it on ESPN. I'm actually pulling it up as we speak. It was from Matt Miller, who obviously does the NFL draft scout thing. He's done that for many, many years. I think a decade and a half now professionally doing this. But he said a guy that he is most looking forward to, a current day 3 prospect, has the best chance to rise with a great week. And he says Jaren Hall, BYU quarterback. The quarterback class is dominated by underclassmen not eligible to participate at the Senior Bowl, which opens the door for Hall, a sudden quarterback prospect with great ability to throw on the move and create inside and outside the pocket. And what he means by that is Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, all guys that are underclassmen or otherwise are ineligible because they haven't graduated, etc., to play in this game. So it opens the door, as he mentioned, for Jaren Hall to come in. He says the 6'1" senior, COVID junior, whatever, same difference, is already 24 years old, which will impact how NFL teams view him, but his production has been phenomenal with 31 touchdown passes to 6 interceptions in 2022 with a QB rating of 79.3. He's also dangerous on the ground with 3 more touchdowns via rushes. Hall is a day 3 prospect, but in a quarterback class that's very unsettled beyond the first round, Hall has room to rise this week. And that's actually a very positive thing to hear if you're a Jaren Hall stan, and I am one of those. I think Jaren Hall, I think the absolute world of this young man, just absolute class act all the way around. We talked last week about how he might be the next Brock Purdy per The Athletic. He has got all the tools, it feels like, to make a move up draft boards this week down there in Mobile. What he has to show, though, is he's got to show that being 24 years old, being a little more mature, that his physical tools are not completely, I guess, how do I say this? They're not completely maxed out. Because NFL teams are going to look at him and say, okay, well, he's 24. If we've got a guy have comparable skill talent who's 21 or 22, why wouldn't I go for the younger prospect? That's going to be something he's going to have to battle, as Miller mentioned, just due to his age. But the one thing about Jaren is we all know this. when the chips are down, when he seems to have his back against the wall, he seems to come out with some of his best performances. And he had a really, really fine season for BYU this past year. Injuries aside, he had that shoulder injury that really clearly hampered him during the month of October, none more so than that game against Notre Dame. Also missed the bowl game. That was obviously a thing that he'll have to prove that high ankle sprain that he had suffered in the lead up. Actually, no, it was not in the lead up. It was actually in that Stanford season finale. He suffered the high ankle sprain that knocked him out of the bowl game. He's got to prove to the scouts this week there's no ill effects from that. Typically, those injuries we've all heard, we've all become seemingly experts on high ankle sprains due to the injury to Patrick Mahomes. Some people say it's a 3 to 6 weeks, it's 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the severity in terms of full recovery. Well, Jaren should be close to having that full recovery on that ankle, and he's going to have to go out and show that. Obviously, he's got an ability to throw the ball all over the yard. We all know that, and they mentioned the fact that he can make plays both inside and outside the pocket with his mobility. One thing that he also has to prove is that being 6'1", being a shorter prospect, is not going to hamper him in terms of being able to see the throwing lanes. One thing that I had an NFL person tell me that's far more in the know on why Jaren Hall's got a day 3 grade on him right now is that he does not see the middle of the field well. What he means by that is look at the production for BYU's tight ends. Where do tight ends do most of their work mainly? In the middle of the field. Where did BYU seemingly throw the ball all the time with Jaren Hall at quarterback? To the outside, to the wide receivers. Now, that could be a personal preference thing for a guy like Jaren Hall, but this week he's got to prove he can see guys across the middle, see those crossing receivers, see the tight end on those hook routes, the hitch routes that they'll be running into the middle of the field. He's got to prove he can see those over some of those bigger offensive linemen out there. Now, other guys we need to talk about, Puka Nacua. Now, Puka, if you were to say which of these 3 guys, you said Jake, 85% of guys get drafted. Which of these BYU guys doesn't get drafted in your mind if it's going to come to that? It's probably Puka Nacua. And I don't see why he wouldn't get drafted, but just because of the lack of hype about him is why I am concerned that he may ultimately go undrafted if he does not show out in a circumstance like this at the Senior Bowl. Any Cougar fan, any of you listening and or watching this podcast know what Puka Nacua is capable of doing. He is a do-everything type prospect. I compared him to Deebo Samuel multiple times this year. His ability to carry the ball, to catch it, make plays out of the backfield, at the regular X or Z receiver role, he has got all the capability of doing that, but he's got to prove that against some of the best talent this week. Does he have a chance to move up if he has a good week down there in Mobile? Absolutely, but the lack of hype for him coming into this is mildly concerning to me as a guy who is very interested to see where he ultimately does land. I am of the opinion that even if he were to go undrafted, that Puka Nacua, I think, would make an NFL roster. He has got the size, the speed, the weight, the catch radius, the ability to make plays that I think any coach who knows what they're looking for would make use of a young man like this. But this is a huge opportunity because, like I said, I have seen very little in terms of notes on Puka Nacua about him in the NFL draft. So the hope is that this week at the Senior Bowl, he goes out there and proves to everybody that, hey, I'm a prospect you probably should have been looking at earlier on, and I'm a guy you absolutely should be tracking moving forward here on into the NFL Combine, Pro Day, all that stuff. Now, the third guy that I am most excited for, because I think he's going to be the highest drafted guy for BYU this year, is Blake Freeland. A guy who came to BYU, had never played offensive line, had all the athletic traits of a great offensive lineman, but had played quarterback, tight end, punter, it felt like, all the different positions you could have played outside of offensive line in football growing up. But BYU saw the genetic traits he had, said, you know what, you're going to come in here, we're going to bulk you up. They got him to around 300 pounds on his 6'8" frame, and made him into a very, very athletic offensive lineman. Does that mean that Blake ends up playing left tackle in the NFL? I have no way of knowing that, but he has all of the athletic gifts to make an NFL team say, oh my goodness, we need to bring this kid in because he has still not reached his potential. Think about this, folks. He's been at BYU for 4 years. He redshirted the first part of his first season at BYU, came in cold off the bench seemingly in that upset win over Boise State. If you recall it, it was also Baylor Romney's first start as a Cougar. And he went out there at right tackle, had barely been learning the position, and fared extremely well. He has got a competitive streak, a nasty streak that he is very want to show out there on the football field. But he's a very chill dude off the field. It's a really interesting combo that I look forward to seeing what he can show NFL teams this week. All the physical tools are there. The height, the weight, the length, the overall athleticism. This is a kid, if you recall, was an all-state basketball player, won multiple state titles in the track and field in the throws events at the Utah High School Athletic Association level at the 6A ranks. So this is a kid, speaking of Blake, that I feel like is just barely kind of just scratching the surface of what he can become as an offensive lineman. And I think that an NFL team is probably going to look at him and say, man, there's oodles and oodles of potential in this young man. I think the one thing that you can point to with Blake is a similar circumstance to what Ziggy Ansah had when Ziggy went to the NFL not the NFL combine, the Senior Bowl when he was coming out of BYU. You remember Ziggy? All of the athletic traits in the entire world. Tall, fast, freakishly strong, had barely played any football period in his life, but he just had all those traits, proved to be very coachable. I remember the Detroit Lions were one of the teams coaching that Senior Bowl. They fell in love with him, and they took him with the number 5 overall pick. And yes, did his career pan out to be the double-digit sack artist that many of us hoped he would become in the NFL? No, but he had multiple moments during his career in the NFL, speaking of Ziggy, that he proved that this is a kid who can make plenty of money, and also be a contributor to a high-level team. And that's the one thing that I think Blake Freeland's got to kind of think he's got the same type of trajectory here. The hope is that Blake has a longer and more fruitful career on the offensive line than Ziggy did, because Ziggy dealt with numerous injuries during his time in the pro game. But I'm very bullish on Blake Freeland, and I cannot wait to see what he shows this week at the Senior Bowl. Like I said, we got eyes and ears on the ground down there in Mobile from the Locked On Network. We'll be sure to bring you any and all information we can glean. Anything I read as well, we'll be sure to bring to you throughout the week as well. But coming up next, I want to switch gears and talk a little BYU basketball. Obviously, it's better to come from an expert's mouth than my own. Well, I'm going to welcome in Jason Jordan. He is the Locked On college basketball recruiting insider for us here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're going to talk a lot about where BYU is right now, where they need to get to as they go into the Big 12, and what some of the prospects, both currently coming into the program, as well as guys BYU's currently recruiting, may do for the Cougars as they try to compete this season and beyond as members of the Big 12 Conference. We'll get to that conversation here momentarily. First, though, need to get a word in on our friends over at FanDuel. They've been a big part of ours all year long. And of course, the Super Bowl is upcoming, and the only app you need to use at your Super Bowl party is our friends at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. We're really excited about having FanDuel as our new sports betting partner for the Locked On Podcast Network, because they are the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They've got so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Right now, what you need to do is download FanDuel, the app right now, so you can bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. What that means is you get up to $3,000. $3,000, my friends, back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Think about that. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown in the big game. And the best part is you can customize it to however you want to go about it. You want to put a parlay together? They got that for you guys. Want prop bets? All of that is available to you now from our friends at FanDuel. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings out instantly. Think about that. It can be done right away. So get out there and check it out. That's the FanDuel app. Join FanDuel today by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim that no sweat first bet. Once again, a $3,000 potential reward in free bets from our friends at FanDuel on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and of course, our new partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Pleased to be joined now by Jason Jordan, of course, the college basketball recruiting insider here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Just a reminder that all of these interviews are Locked On Insiders is brought to you by LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your 2023 goals. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, Jason, thanks again for taking some time to join us here on Locked On Cougars and talking some BYU hoops. How are you, sir?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing great. Thanks again for carving out some time for us here. And obviously, this BYU basketball season, I don't think for any Cougar fan has gone the way they hoped it would go. If I'm being frank, they're 14-10 as of recording of this podcast, and scuffling along. It feels like a little bit in the West Coast Conference, but they are getting ready to jump to the Big 12 next season. So I'm going to give you kind of a 30,000-foot view question right now. Where do you think BYU stands right now versus what they need to be when they get to the Big 12 next fall?
I mean, there's some hope. I mean, you had the game against Gonzaga. You probably should have won. You had the game against St. Mary's. You probably should have won there. Y'all are probably mad that I brought that up because you had just gotten over it. So, I mean, there's hope. You got to, as fans, you have to hold on to hope. And you could have easily won those games. So that's what you tend to lean into. And I think that that's not a reach. I watched the St. Mary's game, and that was certainly a game that you guys could have won. So I think that, and then you have young talent like Dalen and Richie and Traore. And I think those are good pieces. So I think, it's tough. I mean, the Big 12 stuff, there's no way around it. Kansas State, Kansas, Oklahoma. I mean, I'm going to talk about the murderer's row that you're going to go up against next year. But, it'll be tough, but I think you're trending in the right direction, given that you have young talent and you're getting them some much needed reps to go into that league, because you you are definitely going to need it in that league for sure. But they're going to need it to, you guys are formidable, more than formidable. I mean, you're proving your mettle, and I think that's good. I think hope is good, and I think you have hope. Because there are some teams that don't have hope. Be clear. I had this conversation yesterday. They just don't.
I think all Cougar fans are happy to hear that coming from you, a guy who covers this sport day in and day out. And you mentioned two guys in particular I wanted to ask about, Hall and Saunders. Both of them freshmen, both of them older freshmen. Obviously, a lot of people know that BYU has guys who go out on missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they've gone out, served 2 years, and now are back in the program. But both were high-level prospects when they originally signed with BYU. What do you see from those two in particular that you talk about that gives you a quote unquote that hope for the Cougars moving forward?
Well, they show spurts. I mean, Dalen's pretty consistent. Well, I would say they both need to work on consistency, but that's to be expected at where they're at. But then, Dalen had the big 23-point game against St. Mary's. He was like your savior. So he's showing star potential there. Richie has been pretty steady all year. And I think as a building block going forward, when you look logical progression, that is a pretty solid foundation to build on in your backcourt. And so I think that the future looks bright in that regard.
Now, you also mentioned Fousseyni Traore. He's a guy that he's undersized height-wise at his position, but he makes up for it with his length and his wingspan and just his overall athleticism. What do you think the ceiling is for a guy like him?
I like the undersized bigs, man. I mean, I think they work harder. It's like they have little man complex, but they're not that little. But he definitely fits that mold. A big, strong, low post presence, defensive presence. Like you said, the wingspan is the wingspan. I definitely think, he's come on strong this year. What is he at? Like 12-8 or something like that in the season, something like that. Those are huge numbers. I mean, Big 12 is a big physical conference, so it'll be right what he's used to, right what he seems to like. He seems to love that physical game down in the paint, and I think he'll mesh right into the style that is the Big 12. So he's going to be vital, if not paramount, for you guys going forward.
Now, Mark Pope has been very, very heavily using the transfer portal during his time at BYU so far. One guy that I wanted to ask you about is Jackson Robinson. Obviously, he spent a season at Texas A&M, spent a season in Arkansas, now lands at BYU, and the comments he's made to the media indicate that he feels like he's found a place at BYU where he wants to stick long term. He's got time on his side still, crazily enough, after his freshman year was the COVID year, all that stuff. Is he capable of becoming the 3-and-D at minimum type guy that I think most people projected him as a 4-star talent coming out?
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a fan of his, even back in the AAU days. Had 17 against Gonzaga. So those are the bright spots you see. But he's been pretty consistent, almost at 10 points a game. I think 3.2. I think I looked it up the other day, and he was, like around 3 assists a game, but just well-rounded. Definitely a on the floor presence guy. And that's what you need on the court, and specifically in the backcourt and on the perimeter. So he's definitely a guy I feel like you can build around.
Now, obviously, as BYU moves towards joining the Big 12, most Cougar fans, when I ask them about, okay, what do you want to see BYU get going into the Big 12? They say size. They see the Big 12 beating the crap out of each other, for lack of a better term, night in and night out. And they're going into probably the premier basketball conference in the country. And relative to some of those rosters in the Big 12, they are undersized. So is that, I guess, in your mind, what is that the number one thing BYU needs to focus on as they move forward here, is getting more size, especially along the interior?
Yeah, size and depth. I would say depth of that size, right? And you got Traore, but he's gonna need help because it's gonna be tough. They Big 12 keep throwing big bodies at you down there in the paint, and that's their claim to fame. And so I would definitely say this: stocking up on that front court and those big hefty guys down there that can battle. Excuse me, like Traore are definitely what they're probably gonna grab in the portal, are gonna look for in the portal. And I know they know that, so. That is definitely what you're probably going to be picking up in the spring and summer.
You mentioned the fact that depth question, because they have a Tiki Elliott there, and he was as raw of a prospect as I have seen into a program. Mark Pope has talked about it. He played all of 17 organized basketball games. If I think it was the number with Mark Pope threw out there coming to BYU. Do you feel like a guy like that, where they're so raw, but you see the athletic potential in them, is the way maybe BYU should go in terms of hoping to develop talent versus maybe having to go out and win a recruiting battle here and there?
Yeah, we'll see. Yes, but the world we're living in now, i.e. the transfer portal, it's a whole new world. It's like a whole different lane, and you guys are still a name that rings out on the recruiting trail. So BYU, you're gonna be able to get in some proven talent. What I mean by proven is guys that may be at a lower level, yes, but they're still at the level, right? Meaning the collegiate level, and it's not high school, and that is a big difference, right? So they're going to really scour the globe of the transfer portal, which is going to swell at the seams because they've added 14 more days for people to make up their minds. So I definitely think that you'll be able to get some really quality big guys and to go along with the guys that have a lot of potential.
Now, I got a couple of questions about guys BYU is already interested in the 2024 class, Jason, I want to ask you about. We'll get to that in a moment. Do you need to get a quick word in on one of our great local sponsors, our friends over at UCCU? And just a reminder that you let UCCU make your family's dream of owning a home come true by making it more affordable. Right now, UCCU is offering low-rate 7 and 10-year ARMs with rate inflation protection, an adjustable rate mortgage, or an ARM for short. Comes with the initial low rate of 7 to 10 years. After that adjusts to rate fluctuate based on the market. The big advantage of an ARM right now is that it comes with a lower initial rate that's lower than a conventional mortgage, actually making it easier for you to own a home and get in on a home. And with this lower rate, it gives you more purchase power than a traditional mortgage. In fact, you get up to 10% more housed with that ARM for the same payment as a conventional loan with our friends over at UCCU. So get on it now. To learn more, visit or get an ARM started, simply visit uccu.com and select the ARM that works best for you, or stop by any UCCU branch in person. That's UCCU. Love where you bank. Thanks again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Always appreciate you guys checking out the show. Continuing on here with Jason Jordan, our Locked On college basketball recruiting insider here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And Jason, there are three guys that BYU fans know of in the 2024 class in terms of the high school rankings that BYU is chasing. And one of them is all of them have a local connection, but one of them in particular is Brody Kozlowski. And he's got a family connection via his mother to BYU. She was actually a standout athlete in her own right, playing for BYU. But this is a kid who's just seemingly on the cusp of breaking out nationally on the recruiting scene. What do you see from him, and what do you think BYU's chances are of making sure that he stays home at BYU?
Oh, good. I mean, the family connection never hurts, right? But I saw him with the Utah prospects. I think he and another guy you guys are on, Isaac Davis, both played for Utah prospects. Yeah. Y'all tend to be really immersed with the Utah prospects. I don't know, call it a hunch. But stretch for a low post score. Definitely, like you said, I do think he's on the cusp. He had a really strong spring and summer on the Adidas circuit last year, and that's no slouch. Obviously, everybody knows Nike EYBL runs the world, but Adidas is a second in line for sure. So to be formidable in that league is saying a lot. And at 6'7", his ability to be versatile and knock down shots is something that's gonna propel him, not even just in the rankings, but just what's more important, his overall game. And so he's kind of coming into his own now, and I think he's probably going to be in for a big spring.
Now, you mentioned Isaac Davis, and what I've seen from him, I've seen some of the highlights he's shown. I actually chance to catch one of his games on YouTube, if I recall correctly. It might have been another website, but he screams to me just all kinds of athleticism. He's similar to Finney Traore, where he's a little bit undersized, but plays bigger than his listed height and weight. What do you see from him?
Yeah, it's like you said. I mean, kind of like that, but his motor is the
Yeah.
biggest thing is his motor, and that's one of the things I think are, if I had to pick the greatest skill, and trust me, it's a skill, it's
Mhm.
to have a high motor because when you have a high motor at that size, you are going to be productive, and that's what coaches want. They want a productive player. At his size, like you said, you think he's like 6'6", 6'7", but plays low post. Doesn't he's He's one of those guys who is okay with who he is. So what I mean by that is he's not trying to run the point. Yeah, he's like 6'7", I'm a point guard. Yeah, I'm going to the NBA. I got to be Penny Hardaway. No, he is he understands that he is going to do his most damage down there in the paint area, and so he kind of maximizes his potential down there. So he stays within himself, and because of that, he is a productive, very very productive player for them.
Now, BYU will always try and tap into that Los Academy and their international
Yeah,
trove of prospects. Malik Diallo, if I'm pronouncing his name
yeah,
correctly, is the
yeah.
latest guy that BYU's on. 6'8", kind of plays a hybrid center forward role. It
Yeah.
feels like Wasatch. What about him? What do you see from him on tape, etc.?
Really like him at Wasatch. He plays in the NIBC, which means he plays in the number one conference in the country on planet Earth at that age group, right? So he's getting some much needed training on the job, right? So he's playing against Montverde and IMG and all those superstar teams. But he's done really well. He's averaging about 6 rebounds a game. He's a workhorse down there too. High motor, high energy player. Finishes with both hands, but really active rebounder and a defensive presence. So he's a guy who's also going to be in for a big summer. I'm sure anybody's trying to get him to be on their summer teams for what I hear. But we'll see where he lands. I think he's pretty stable where he's at. But he's a guy I'm definitely going to be watching. I'll see him at the NIBC in March, and I'll definitely see him in Geico if they're able to make it qualify for that.
Now, Mark Pope is well known for literally globetrotting all over the world. He feels like if he needs to go out and recruit a guy, he went to Madagascar this past year and was the only, I guess, college coach at the Division I level to make that trip. What is his rep on the recruiting trail, just as a coach?
Yeah, he definitely is a name that rings out. So when you get I always do like I call them B-side conversations when the recorder's off and they're like, I guess so did they hit you up? Or, I'm talking about a different coach or a different school. Like, yo, when I've heard the excitement from my Mark Pope text me, I've heard that, so and that I don't say that about every coach because they don't say that about every coach and they don't have the inflection in their tone about every coach. But he's definitely a guy whose name rings out and he brings the excitement. And that's what you want on the recruiting trail. Those little things matter. You want a recruit to be excited that the head man hit them or even the head assistant hit them to say that, hey, we're going to start coming to your games, we're coming to your practice, and they definitely check that box. So that's big. That's big. If your fans don't know that already, that is definitely a big thing, and he certainly brings that excitement to recruits.
Now, I've talked with enough people about the Power 5 label in football recruiting side of things, like being able to go out on the recruiting sphere and say, hey, we are a Power 5 program.
Right.
How important will it be for BYU to say that we, A, are Power 5, and also, B, that we are part of the Big 12 conference moving forward here?
Yeah, it means something for sure. I'll say this because I've had this question asked to me a couple times. Depending on the recruit, like the level, so an elite kid, meaning like a McDonald's type kid, like let's say a top 25, they don't care about that. They don't care about that because the reality is they're just so used to it. When you get to that second tier, it matters to some degree, but more so than anything, these kids really want to go where they're going to play, where they're going to have the right fit. I think now in the last 3 to 5 years more than ever, kids are really focused on fit, where it used to be cliche. They actually mean it now because they're starting to see that, they're starting to pay attention to March and see that the big boys go down just like everybody else in weekend one. So, I think they're not so much mesmerized by the name on the front of the jersey or even the conference. But, the reality is when you can say Power 5, when you can say, we're in the Big 12, that means my grandma is going to be able to see me on ESPN. And, they'll be able to see me on national television. And that is the part that matters, especially in this day and age where it's okay for recruits to now start talking about marketing and not look like divas, right? Because we have NIL. So you got to tell me about my marketing, coach. If you want me to come, let me know something. How much am I getting? Let me know. So, I think it matters in that regard more than anything.
Well, we all know that it's a whole new world out there. Transfer portal,
man.
NIL, it's completely revolutionized the game. So you mentioned the fact, so what is your schedule for the next couple of months? I'm sure you're going to be at high school tournament after high school tournament, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I'll be NIBC this weekend. NIBC all the weekends, right? So I'll be in NIBC, I'll be at Montverde IMG, I believe it's February 10th, and then I'll be at the NIBC close March 2nd and 3rd, and then we'll be at Geico early April and McDonald's and stuff like that. So busy times ahead.
Well, fantastic stuff, Jason. Look forward to doing this again down the road, and thanks for taking some time.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right, there you go. That is Jason Jordan, of course, our Locked On insider here on the Locked On Podcast Network. A big thank you to him for taking the time to join us here, talking all things BYU and recruiting moving forward for the Cougars. We'll have more for you guys tomorrow. Signing day in the college football realm. We'll have you ready for that as well. Make sure you join us every single day, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen, our friends over at the Locked On Big 12 Podcast. Get caught up on everything going on in Big 12 football, basketball, and beyond. It's available wherever you get your podcast. It's also available on YouTube. Once again, I'm Jay Catch. Thanks again for joining us. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast. See ya.